as children, as young adults, events of 60, 70, 80 years ago are difficult for us to relate to. And how much more so events that you read about, you speak to people about, don't make any sense, are difficult to believe that people could have been so bad. The Holocaust is something that's hard to relate to, and that's a good thing. HaKadosh Baruch has been very good to us in Israel, in America, and many other places where events of that time are difficult to relate to, and that's something that we're thankful for. And yet, just because something was many years ago doesn't mean that we have the right to forget. We remember out of respect, out of derech eretz, for those who are fortunate enough to still be here, to have survived this terrible time. We remember to be inspired, and we remember to learn the lessons that these heroic survivors have to still teach us. The Psukim in the aftermath of the Mabul, in the aftermath of the Great Flood, describe how HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided to create a sign, a keshes, a rainbow. And as per the Psukim, Vayah ba'anani anan ala aretz, when I spread the clouds over the land, v'nir asa hakeshes be'anan, and that rainbow will then shine through. Explains the Reisha Rav, Baron Levine Zichron Levracha, Vayah ba'anani anan, when it appears to be dark, this sign of the rainbow, v'nir asa hakeshes, that light shines through, reminding us that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God is ever present, reminding us that even though it's dark, there's always light that is hiding behind those clouds and is just waiting to burst out. And the light of the inspiration of the survivors, who you students, our ASHAR students, our eighth graders, are going to have the opportunity to interview, to learn from the light, not just from the darkness, but the light of resilience, the light of rebuilding, and the light of generations of productive Ovdei Hashem, happy and healthy children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, so fortunate to experience constantly the brachos of Hashem.
Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever. The Names Not Numbers Oral History Film Documentary Project is remembering the stories of the Holocaust and is telling the story of the Holocaust for the world to hear, for the world to learn, and to inspire future generations to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred and intolerance. This unique project is in its 16th year. Over 2,500 survivors and 6,000 students have participated in it worldwide. The students were instructed by teachers and professionals. They learned interviewing techniques from journalists. They learned filming techniques and editing skills from documentary filmmakers. The students interviewed, filmed, and edited the 2-hour interviews with each survivor to make 20-minute oral histories that are compiled in the Names Not Numbers documentary at the school. You're about to view the documentary Names Not Numbers, a movie in the making. This film chronicles the students as they are being trained by the professionals and includes their reflections. In it is embedded approximately 10 minutes from each interview. This is the students' work, their filmed and edited interviews. Through this project, our students are preserving history, and they are the witnesses to the witnesses.
I saw a fence in front of me, and on the other side were children playing. We were so dehumanized that we didn't feel anything.
At first, I was hoping that my brother had survived. At that moment, the glass of milk was more important than my hand.
To save your family, you do what you have to do.
On the one hand, I was happy. On the other hand, I was, believe it or not, I was embarrassed
that my whole family survived.
Each and every individual that you will interview, you're going to be making your own movie. It's our job to teach not only of the tragedy, but to teach how they rebuilt, how they had families, how somehow they survived.
We had the opening of Names Not Numbers.
We're making a documentary about the survivors and their story.
Rabbi Jacobson was telling us we're very fortunate now to be so safe here.
This is the last generation that has the privilege to hear the survivors' testimonies firsthand.
Mrs. Rosenberg was introducing us to Names Not Numbers.
We've all been looking forward to it, but it just never seemed real until that moment.
The survivors and the students are telling the story of the Holocaust for the world to learn and to inspire future generations to combat anti-Semitism and all forms of hatred and intolerance.
It makes me feel proud that I get to help share their story with future generations.
We really have an opportunity that generations later won't have.
The Holocaust is really important in our history and we should never forget it.
The title, Names Not Numbers, represents that we're giving these people's identity back to them.
In the Holocaust, they got numbers. Now we're using their names.
And that's all they called them by, their numbers.
We're saying that they have a story too, showing that who they were and what their stories were.
When you interview a person to make a movie about them, it makes them feel really special. We want to pass on the message that they're human beings and that no human being should treat each other like that ever again.
In preparation for this interview, we were taught how to interview people, we were taught how to use the cameras.
Every question that you ask should not have a yes or no answer. That's the most important thing.
We had a journalist come in, Mrs. Jeanette Friedman.
It was exciting. She has interviewed a lot of people, many of them famous.
Survivors are more likely to tell you what happened to them than they are to their own children, because it gets too personal.
One technique was to ask follow-up questions.
You shouldn't just skip to the next question on your list. You continue the conversation.
But if they were so busy building shuls, then who was raising you?
Well, that's a very good question.
Really looking forward to learning how to use all the equipment.
So what's the difference between what you just saw and this? I'm at a high angle here.
Farah came in one day and taught us how to use the cameras.
All the different equipment for when we interview the survivors.
We learned how to use sounds and how to zoom.
How to get different angles and different kind of shots that we would be taking.
We learned about the rule of thirds. We basically want the subject to be a third away from the edge of the screen.
And we did it ourselves after in groups.
Take one. Take two.
Photography is one of my hobbies, and this is the first time I've got to do something really meaningful with it.
I consider myself a good photographer, and I'm very interested in taking pictures and videos.
Take 6, action. I'm interested in learning more about it because it was really cool.
Our group just had a lot of fun all together.
My great-grandfather went through the war and survived. He's not alive anymore. I don't know very much about his story, and I would like to, so this is the same thing for other people.
Describe the day the Germans came into your town. For every survivor, it's going to be different.
This project was important to me because I really wanted to know how people could survive through those horrible times.
To prepare for this interview, we wrote 60 questions. We really thought about it, and we asked the questions that really meant a lot to us and that we can relate to and look at for the rest of our lives.
They showed us last year's video.
My grandmother was my age when she had to live it.
I think it's important to learn about the Holocaust because it shows people how far other people will go to get rid of people they don't like because of what they believe in. So to prevent something like that from happening ever again.
Today I'm going to interview my great-grandmother,
Mrs. Doris Unger.
Feeling, I guess, excited. I'm feeling proud that I have a connection to her, but I'm also a bit nervous.
We're about to interview Ruth Mermelstein, my great-grandmother.
She was around 16 when the war started. She was in Auschwitz.
I would love to know what it was like and the difference in our daily life now compared to her daily life in the Holocaust.
I'm feeling nervous because I don't know what I'm gonna hear.
I'm going to interview Judy Josephs. I'm feeling really excited to hear her story.
It's very intimidating to be with someone that survived such a tremendous hardship.
We're interviewing someone who went through such a hard time, and we don't really know how it felt.
I am going to interview Shmuel Obeller. I'm stressed out. I hope I asked the right questions.
I'm going to be interviewing Sylvia Kagan.
I'm feeling very nervous and unsure about how it's going to go.
I'm feeling excited but nervous. I would feel guilty about making her cry by asking her questions.
I'm going to interview my grandfather, Dr. Menachem Schmelzer.
He got through the war. He seems like a very strong person.
This project is important to me because 3 of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and it makes me happy to be able to interview my grandparents.
The most meaningful moment was doing the actual interview.
When I sat down, I was worrying a bit. I'm like, oh, I don't want to mess up.
My heart was beating really fast.
Once I sat down and looked Sylvia in the eye, I wasn't nervous anymore.
My name is Shmuel Bella. I was born August 9th, 1927, in the town of Auschwitz, which was called Auschwitz by the Germans. My father was what you would call a custom peddler. I had a brother and a sister. My brother's name was Zalman, and my sister was Leah. In the morning, I had to go in a public school. We came home, we had lunch, and we went to Cheder till about 7, 8 o'clock at night. There was a field there across the street. and we played the ball. There was nothing else to do there. Shabbos was very beautiful.
Can you sing us a song that your father sang at the Shabbos table?
I should sing the song? Yeah. Kol mekala shvi'i kuhuloi, kol shema Shabbos, kados machalaloi, menuchu v'simchu, hayar la'idem, yom Shabbosom, yom machmadem, Bobbe v'koribon, koribon uhulam ve'yolmayu, anti malku melech malchayu,
What's your full name?
Judy Josephs. I was born in Poland, in a city by the name of Lublin. My father was a tailor. He had a shop, and my mother stayed home. I had a very happy childhood. We were 5 children. My oldest brother was a medical student in Warsaw. I didn't see him that often. And the others, the one next to him was very much involved with sciences. He was making maps of the world, and he was always telling me stories about other countries. On Saturday, I went to synagogue with my brothers. A lot of times my mother and father rested in the afternoon, and they wanted me to rest with them, but I couldn't sleep. So they let me play, and then later we went out walking, and we usually met a lot of relatives walking also in the city. I was a very happy child. I had a wonderful family, and I was the youngest, and I guess they tried to spoil me.
My name is Sylvia Kagan. I was born October 15, 1926.
Where were you born?
Romania, a little place called Mikiv in Yiddish. It was a kind of a farm community. I had my parents, my brother, who was 17 years older than I. We lived in a 3-room house without electricity or plumbing. I was privileged because I was one child. My brother was an adult by the time I started school. We were better off than many of the other Jewish families in Mikiv because we had a piece of land in the back of the house, plus other land away from the house where we grew a lot of the food that we consumed. On Shabbos, my mother always went to shul while my father was alive. By the way, he died before I was 8. My mother would cook borscht and potatoes for Saturday night and invite only the male neighbors. They would come over for borscht and potatoes.
My name is Ruth Mermelstein. I was born in Czechoslovakia. It was called Mukachevo. But then in 1938, the Hungarians came in. It was called Munkac. Munkac was a big city with surrounding villages, and half of the population was really Jewish. My father, Olva Sholom, had a wholesale grocery with 2 of his brothers. We even had a truck, and they delivered the groceries to all over the country, up to the Polish border. Well, I went to school. I was learning how to knit and crochet there, and which I didn't do in the other elementary schools. And then once a week we had a rabbi coming to the Jewish people, and we learned of Jewish history. My favorite Yom Tov was Pesach, I think, right? We all got new clothes, and we brought down the Pesach dishes. We had it stored up in the attic. It was a beautiful Yom Tov. It's about half an hour away by train to my grandparents and my cousins, and they used to come very often to us. And we used to go there for vacation too. I had actually very close friends, 2 of them. Matter of fact, one of them was my cousin. We were always together. So my sister and I and her, every Shabbos we used to go, together. We used to go to each other's homes, and we took walks and so on.
Thank you for coming to ASHAR. What's your name?
My name is Menachem Schmerzer. I was born in Hungary in a small village called Kecel. My father was in the wine-making business. My mother was working at home, the household. I loved them. They were wonderful people. And I had one younger brother, 3 years younger than I am. We had a little house there. We had a sandbox when we were small. There was a big courtyard with a dog and with some chicken, some turkey. We were scared of the turkey. Grade 2, we moved to a larger village, a larger town. There was a Jewish day school. We had there, of course, Limudei Kodesh. We learned Chumash, and we learned davening, and we learned the secular subjects. My favorite holiday was Pesach. On Pesach, we used to go together with my grandmother and my uncles and aunts and cousins. I remember the matebol soup of my grandmother very well. The entire Seder is a wonderful memory for me.
My name is Doris Ungar. I was born in a town called Frauenkirchen in Austria, March 1934. And it was a suburban town, and Jewish people lived together, and we were friendly to each other. My father's name was Yosef Zachariah Tzvi, and my mother's name was Gittel. I have 2 sisters and a brother. There's Gertrude, there's Sarah, and my brother Salomon. My father was a dayan in the town, and he was a rabbi in a yeshiva. My mother was so bright. She knew about nutrition. My family had to do everything from scratch. There was no instant foods like today. Kugels, soup, meat, chicken.
What was your favorite?
I was very little, so I don't know. I ate everything. Everything was my favorite. My father was a very special man. He was very learned. Rabbis used to come to our house and learn with him. He never raised his voice. And my mother too, very calm with the children. Very special people.
The Jews, a helpless minority, are persecuted in the name of Aryan supremacy.
Before the war, there was really no anti-Semitism at all until the Hungarians came in.
A neighbor's daughter was getting married. She and her mother would go from house to house inviting the people to the wedding, including the Jewish people.
There always was a lot of anti-Semitism.
When I came home from Cheder at night, at times we were stoned by the Polish.
The children that went to school got pelted with stones every morning.
They put me down on the ground, and a few girls held me down, and the other one took some bacon on my lips.
Occasionally we were bullied, and occasionally we were chased.
On Shabbat, my brother went with his friend to a park. A lot of students, older students, attacked them. My brother somehow was able to get away, and his friend got really beaten up so badly that he had to be taken to a hospital.
I knew of Hitler as a German person or Austrian who was bad for the Jews, but it seemed so far away.
Right now I'm in the Museum of Jewish Heritage in Manhattan.
It's a comb, okay? Right? Anybody want to say anything else? Tani, how do you know it's a comb? Okay, I need somebody who reads English. Somebody who reads English very well. English, what's your name? Tzvi. Okay, Tzvi. How would something like this be used or reflect Jewish resistance? Okay, and her name is Grunberger. Okay, Tzvi, take it away.
Eventually, she and her sister were brought to the United States by an uncle.
Okay, that's good, good.
That's my great grandma.
Is it? Then read it. Wait, this is your great-grandmother?
Ruth Mermelstein.
Ruth Murmelstein, your great-grandmother? Seriously? Yeah. That's so awesome. That's why you stood up to read this. Did you not know that? You didn't know that that was her artifact? So that's really Bashert, isn't it? Wow.
So Ruth Murmelstein, who's my great-grandmother, she made a comb because she didn't have any hair. And the reason why she made it is because she was hoping one day to grow her hair back. When I saw the picture, Dr. Rudensky called on me to read, and I was reading the paragraph, and the last thing that it said was that it's by Ruth Murmelstein. She never told me about it, and I never knew about it till today.
It really interested me when they showed the comb of the person that I was going to be interviewing.
And as a symbol of her ability to survive, of her desire to survive, she made a comb. Not because she could use it. She didn't have any hair. She didn't have any hair.
She survived and her sister survived, but the rest of her family passed away.
We went on a tour of the whole museum.
It felt really realistic. I'd only seen it in pictures before.
They showed us what the beds were like. Multiple people would go in one bed. They showed me what conditions were like there before people told me, but like I didn't really picture it. It was like shocking to me.
I always understood it, but not really like in depth.
One of the artifacts was a doll, and it said that someone carried it through the entire war. I thought to myself, how could someone bring this all the way through? And I thought about how much they must have missed their family and how much the doll meant to them.
Can you describe the day the Germans came into your town?
Yes. September 1, 1939, the war broke out. About a week or so, the heavens were red like fire. Everybody was worried. The Germans' army broke through right away. There was no resistance. Within 2-3 hours, they were right in my town. This was the Wehrmacht. This was not the occupation, but the fighting. A couple of days, and they continued occupying Poland. Then they came in the Gestapo, Geheime Staatspolizei. They were already very, very, very bad.
When did things start to change?
September 1939. It started with a bombing. They bombed the city, and we escaped to a little town where my mother came from by the name of Osmolice, with those planes coming down low and shooting at us, and us trying to hide under trees. When they came in, I wasn't even there. I was in that little town. We stayed there until they invaded and everything got settled, and we came back to our home. And my father went to his business, but that didn't last very long. They made him close his business. They didn't permit him to work there any longer. So what he did, he took some machines, like sewing machines, and he worked from the house. He still was able to keep some of his customers. They came out with new rules, like almost every second day. If they were walking on the sidewalk, Jews had to get off the sidewalk, walk on the side. Whatever they did was wrong anyway, because they always looked for excuses so they can hit him or kick him or whatever.
On March 13th, 1938, Hitler marched into Austria.
I was about 3 years old when the Nazis arrived in our town. My father came home beaten up from school Friday night. That's when we knew they were there. The feeling was awful. It was indescribable feeling. My father really was a very, very aware person. He knew it's dangerous, you have to leave a place. We left everything behind and we left right away. My mother got papers from Eichmann, believe it or not. She went there and she asked for papers and they gave her the papers and she walked out of there, and when she got to the corner she ran home and we hired a taxi and he took us to Vienna. Somehow we all got in there and we had nothing with us, just the clothing on our back. A long trip. We went through the back roads on fields. We didn't go on the main road.
When the Germans came in 1944, my sister and I didn't even go out to the street because they were beating the girls and women. They did terrible things to them. We had to wear a Jewish star. After 6 o'clock, we were not allowed to be on the streets. My mother gave birth in 1944, January, to a little girl. And I took really care of her. She was like my baby. And I stood in the window looking to the yard, and I saw SS men coming in, and they were knocking on the door, and they looked for my father, but my father wasn't home. He started a soup kitchen, so he was busy with that. Then they gave us 10 minutes to pack. A horse and wagon was waiting outside, and they took us away.
In 42, they took away all the young men, including my brother, who was 17 years older than I, to a so-called Munkosazot. It was a work battalion. And we didn't hear from him at all between 42 and 44, when we were told that we would be relocated. We didn't know where to. In April of 44, just after Pesach, we were told to meet tomorrow morning at the shul with as much luggage as we can carry. There were a whole line of horse and wagons gathered, non-Jewish, that took us to the ghetto.
When the war started, I was 5 years old in 1939. In 1944, or even earlier already, able-bodied Jewish men were drafted in the Hungarian army into special battalions for Jews. The treatment of the Jewish men by the Hungarians was extremely cruel. My father was also drafted, and he was away from us for about 3 years. In March 1944, the German army invaded Hungary on a Sunday. The men were already not with the families. The invasion came as a total shock. We suddenly noticed the German troops and German tanks roaring through the villages. We were, of course, extremely scared because we knew that that is going to be a terrible time coming.
No one was able to bring cameras, no one was able to really write things, and people who survived have the full experience, and it's very good that we can still get the story from them.
She had a good life growing up, and then when war broke out, it obviously got very tough.
Her mother sewed pictures of her family in her coat.
Every day she only got tea, soup, and a piece of bread.
He bent down to pick up some food. The guards came over and started beating him. He took the loaf of bread from another prisoner.
He got sent to the death march.
She heard a kid saying, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad.
All the Jews had to move out into the ghettos. My father was taken away to a camp. My brother was, when the war broke out, was about 9 years old, and my sister was about 6 years old. those 14, 15 years old, those people who worked got extra food from the Jewish government. So I was the one who had to go out and work. I worked at a factory manufacturing the uniforms for the German army. Across the street where the office was a lumber yard. A Jewish man worked there. One day, my boss, the German, told me to go across and bring him a certain tool, like a hammer or whatever it was. So I went over across the street and I asked the man there, but he didn't want to give it to me. So he told me, go back and tell him I'm not here. But what happened when I came back and told him that he's not there, he saw me to the window talking to the Jewish man. He closed up the door and he started beating me. Unbelievable. Now, there was a big miracle here that he did not report it to the camp officers, because if they would report it there, they would send me to Auschwitz. So what happened? I went into hiding. So the Jewish government took my mother as a hostage till I give myself up, which they had to. So I found out that they took my mother, I gave myself up. My little sister was running after me, and she was crying. She says, don't go, don't go, don't go. I had to run away because I had no choice, otherwise they would send my mother to Auschwitz. And this way, let my mother go. However, this didn't last for long, because another couple of months they cleaned up the ghetto from all the Jews, and they were sent to Auschwitz.
The Soviet Union is the last real military threat that stands between Hitler and his plans for expansion.
In 1941, they made a ghetto. They made the Jews go to a certain area. My oldest brother was not with us because Stalin and Hitler made a pact, and they divided Poland into half. So my brother happened to be in the area where the Russians had taken over. Unfortunately, the Germans attacked the Russians in 1941, and I don't think he had time to run away, to escape. And he was one of the first victims in that town where he lived, because they took all the intelligentsia out in the woods and they shot them. The first ghetto was not terrible. We were not enclosed completely. Then they squeezed the people into a very small area. We were 43,000 people in Dublin. And on top of it, we had people from Germany, from all over that came in. So the population was incredible. People were dying from hunger. There was just very little food. My father tried to keep me busy, and he taught me how to sew. And my brother always told me all these stories about California, I almost knew everything about the United States. So he just gave me all these beautiful places to think about. And then the typhus epidemic started, and I contracted typhus too. And there were no hospitals. They made makeshift hospitals. My mother was not going to let me go to one of the hospitals, but I cried and screamed that I want to go because I was so afraid that they should not get the typhus from me. So I did go, and it was horrible because people were just dead next to me. When I got out, I had to be carried. I hardly could see. Walking, forget about it. We were hiding, but I have a hard time talking about that part. But somehow we did escape this ghetto to my mother's village, except for my sister. She got caught. She was the first victim that went to Belzec's death camp.
In Munkac, they had 2 brick factories. They brought them from the surrounding villages to one, and they took us to the second one, which was called the Kalush. They locked us in a basement, my mother with all the kids, and the next day they said if my father doesn't show up, then they're going to kill like 1,500 Jews. When my father heard that, he surrendered. And they beat him up terribly, and they beat up my mother terribly, and then they let us get out of the basement, and we were settling next to everybody else. My mother and father and the 8 children. We were all together. We didn't do anything there. We were just waiting maybe a week or two, that's about it. They promised us that we're going to go to a place where the families will be together, the kids will have playgrounds, and we believed everything.
Few days after the occupation, a new Hungarian government was installed, a pro-Nazi government, and one regulation after the other limiting the Jews came. I do remember vividly, I was not yet 10 years old. My mother was sewing on our jackets and on our coats the yellow stars. My mother used to tell us that there was one Gentile in the village where we lived who told my mother that they would be willing to take my brother and me and keep us with them while my mother was being taken to the ghetto. But my mother did not want to separate from us, and she didn't know what to expect, and she took me and my brother with her and did not give us to that person. The name of the ghetto was Bácsalmás. I remember how we were supposed to take a small luggage and go out of our house where we grew up and go into a ghetto closed in with a fence. It was like a prison. The daily life in the ghetto was terrible. I remember the screams and the cries of the people who were tortured in order to find out whether they hid any precious things. Also, one of the difficult memories that I have, very sick people who were removed from the hospitals because they were Jews. They were also screaming in agony, and we heard that all the time in the ghetto.
We went to the train station and we had no money, we had nothing, and we sat on a bench, all of us. Kids were quiet, we were little, but we were quiet. And the Nazis were walking around with the dogs because Jewish people tried to leave by train. And we were sat there and they never saw us. The dogs didn't smell us, they didn't see us. We got on the train and the conductor came to collect tickets or money. He never saw us. He walked right through the compartment. So we got to Luxembourg. In Luxembourg, we went into a shul and we stayed there. In the shul was packed with Jewish people. There was no room to breathe. And so I was little and I wanted to get out. It was a beautiful summer days. And I crawled out through the basement in the synagogue and went on the street. I found a girl there. She had tons of toys and nobody to play with. And I played with her and I went out every single day. Just nobody knew I was out. Her sister had a boyfriend, a Nazi, and I used to throw stones at him every time. I had a very good aim. And one day I picked up a large rock, hit him on the head, and he got wild. He turned around, he grabbed his gun, and he looked down in the ditch, and I had black hair, dark, you know, and she was blonde and whatever, and he said, "Oh, you're a Jew," to me. And he put the gun right here where I have a sign. It was going to blow me away, and she said, "No, she's my cousin from Italy." He looked, and the girl said, "Come on, let's go, let's go." And he kept on looking back and looking back. So I ran home. I was bleeding from my nose, and I told my father what happened. I always told him everything. And we had to leave.
It was a miracle because while I was into hiding, a transport with Jews a night or two before, they were sent to Auschwitz to be killed. And I was supposed to go. So since this transport to Auschwitz went our way, I was sent to the forced labor camp. I arrived in the Zwangsarbeitslager, which was forced labor camp. They asked everybody, "What do you know? What kind of labor did you do before?" So I was a young boy that time. I didn't know nothing. So they put me to hard labor. We get up early in the morning. We got to have a bread. At night, we came back to the camp. We got a little soup, whatever it was there. This was the whole food for the day. So in this camp, I remained about 6 months. The next day, they moved us to another camp. I already remembered what they told me. If you don't know nothing, they put you to hard labor. So they asked me, are you any kind of mechanic? So I told them, yes, I'm a metal worker. I wound up to work by the building the war machines, buildings, and by doing this, it was a much easier work for me. I wound up to work in a place with another Jewish boy, and one time we had to drag a pipe of about 10 feet long, very heavy. We had to bring it up to the building up there, maybe 200 feet away. And the next morning when we came in, I reported to the headmaster. His name was Obermaster Schaefer. He was the head of the whole area there. We told him if he could possibly move us to another area. And he did. And he told us like this, if you work a whole day and you find that you have nothing what to do, go and hide behind the pipes till the time you have to go back to camp. He was mamish, one of the Chassidim Mesuhelim he was.
They gave us 3 days to report to a little town, which we knew this is the end. And my father found a Polish family that promised they would keep me, but when I went there, they didn't. And that's when I parted from them. Except for my brother Eli, he was hiding out among some of the Poles. My mother had the foresight to put my family photos into the padding of my coat. That's how I have my family's pictures. My brother made me register to go to Germany as a Pole. I didn't look very Jewish, so he thought I'll get away with it. And I was in Germany for a while. We were in this camp about maybe more than 20 Jews. We looked at each other, we knew who was a Jew. But those Poles were terrible, so they gave us out to the Gestapo. So the others were taken to Auschwitz, and I escaped. They were building a factory there, and I was working in the office, so I befriended this architect, and that's how I sit here and talk to you. It was just a miracle, a lot of miracles. He wanted actually to take me to his mother's house to hide me there, and I refused because I said I wouldn't put his family in danger. At that age, this is the only thing that I'm most proud of, that I refused. All I wanted to do is just get back to Poland, so maybe my brother's still alive to see him. I know my brother wound up in Majdanek concentration camp, and he was seen there. They took him to Sobibor, I think. That's what I heard lately. So either one, I mean, yeah. The Poles killed him at the end.
After a few weeks being in the ghetto, we were all taken to the railroad station of that village. We were all taken into the cattle cars, and we saw the stations from the little opening of the door and of the window, and we knew that we are moving to the north. At one point, the train was stopped, and the train was divided into two. One part continued to the north, and another part was moving to the west. And we were in the part that were moving to the west. We didn't know where the people to the north are going, and we didn't know where the people for the west are going. We only knew that we were in the cattle car, no way to sit, no way to lie down, squeezed and standing next to each other, and hungry and thirsty. I had an aunt who just gave birth at that time, and she had a newborn baby of a few days. The camp was called Strasshof, near Vienna in Austria. We arrived and we were taken out of the cattle car. They found some dead people in the car. They were taking us to a shower. They shaved our heads, and we were in that camp for a few weeks. Every morning we had to get up early and stand in line as they were counting us, and if somebody moved, they were hitting the people. But it was not an extermination camp, and it was not a camp where they separated us from each other. So we stayed with my mother and with my brother all the time. A short time later, they took us from that camp into a much smaller camp, Moosbierbaum, where the grown-ups, my mother, had to work in a factory, and we, the children, were just roaming around in the camp. What happened here? One part went to the north and then got to Auschwitz. And everybody in Auschwitz, of the children, nobody survived. And we, the fortunate ones, were taken to the west.
They designated 3 transports from there. We were selected to go with the 2nd transport. We went to cattle cars. They put us about 80 people into a cattle car.
It was very crowded. We ran out of food and water because it took 3 days and 3 nights.
We took along food, but we didn't have any water or bathroom facilities.
I remember a little boy, maybe 3 years old, my cousin's son, who was crying for hours, not for candy or a toy, he wanted water.
So the 2nd day of the trip, they let us off to take care of our needs. And I saw a fence in front of me, and on the other side of the fence they had a playground, the children playing there, and I was thinking, will my little sister ever play like that?
We arrived in Auschwitz on Friday afternoon, May 26, 1944. The doors opened and everybody screamed. Dogs were barking. Everybody was screaming, schnell, schnell, fast, fast, out, out. And they told us to leave everything on the train because it will be delivered to us later. Although nothing had a name on it.
I was holding the baby, and one couple saw me holding the baby, and he said that every mother should own their own children. So I had to give the baby to my mother. Mengele was separating us to the right and to the left.
To the left was the people who went straight to the gas chamber.
My sister and my cousin were to the right, and my mother with the kids. She had with her 4 kids at that time, and she went to the left. And then I was in the line already. I realized that I had the baby's clothes with the diapers, and I was thinking, what's my mother going to do without it?
We were marching forward, forward. I was looking to my left for a second, and when I looked back, my whole family was gone. Only not to see them again. My mother, my sister-in-law, and 2 children.
So I ran out of line. Mengele held onto my shoulder, and I told him I'm just going to give this to my mother. And he looked at my mother. She was 40 years old, but she looked like she's 30. And he said, you look so young. He said, there I will select again. And I was wondering, where is there? But that was the last time I ever saw them.
We were walked into this huge room.
They told us to get completely undressed, and then they shaved our heads and body hair.
From there we went to the shower. And after the shower, we were let out to a different door into the street. Naked, wet. There were hundreds of us. I didn't recognize my cousins. We were 6 girls, and now being naked and without hair, nobody recognized anybody else. So I got very scared. Suddenly I felt alone, and I started screaming, for my 2 first cousins. And they start screaming for me, and we realize we are 2 feet from each other. We just did not recognize each other. So when I realized that the 6 of us are still together, I felt better.
When we came into the camp, they put us on a line, and we had to go through with open arm, and they gave us numbers. 1 plus 8 plus 4 plus 8 plus 5. What does that amount to? Was 26. After 70 years, one time I put on tefillin, so one boy said, Mr. Bella, you have Hashem's name here.
I was so naive, I said, maybe I'll be able to escape, and I tried to wipe it up. So the sap was a little bit worn off, but there was no way of escaping. As I was walking once on the road, I saw a woman, and there was a pile of ashes, and she told me, you see, this is where your parents are, your sisters, your brothers. I looked at her and I said, oh, she never has off her mind. But then, in the back of the barrack, we had like garbage cans to take care of our needs. And I went to one of them. It was only a few feet away, there was a gate. I didn't know at that time, but it was actually the gas chamber. And I heard somebody yelling, Shema Yisrael, and there was a little window, you know, with bars on it, and there was a little kid crying. And then an SS came from outside and closed the flaps, and in a few minutes it was quiet. Every time when I daven and I say Shema Yisrael, she's never in front of me with that little kid. I just can't forget that. And then I came in to the barrack, and I was in real shock, and I came in hysterical, crying, now I know everything, now I know everything.
Did your family know about concentration camps?
Yes, my extended families, they all perished there.
It was just very emotional.
I realized that the Holocaust was a more personal event for each individual survivor. Every story is different. It's not just one big thing.
So many people died and never got to tell their story.
The most meaningful for me was the fact that all the survivors, they could have hope even though there's all the bad things happening to them.
By sharing their story to the world, people learn who they are.
She managed to survive with barely any food.
It was very strong.
After all that's happening to her, today she's able to still move on in life.
We took another train and went to Spain. We found a lot of people there, and they started walking, and we walked with them to Portugal. That was a whole day's walking, and we ended up in Portugal. We ate supper, 1 meal a day. Every year for 2 years that I stayed in Portugal, we had the exact same meal. It was rice, black beans, and a fish called bacalhau. At the time, the children were in danger, so they put us in a home out of the city. It was a terrible place. And one day, the girl, the one in charge, she was horrible. She said, I'll take you to the beach. She took us to the beach, and she said, which child wants to learn how to swim? So nobody said anything. Nobody wanted to. I said, yes, I'd like to. Can I please learn to swim? She said, okay, let's go. Takes me to the middle of the ocean and lets me go. And this goes back to shore. I went all the way, very far down, came up, sputtering, and somehow I started flailing with the arms and the legs, and a wave came, a big wave, and took me all the way back to shore. When I got on shore, she looked like she's seeing a ghost. She thought she's going to kill me, leave me down there in the ocean. And I went and told the bigger boys what happened. The biggest was 10 years old. And they said they're going to take care of her. She used to wait for her boyfriend to pick her up, and there was no electricity anywhere. So they took a linen from a bed, cut out eyes, put it on like a ghost, And while she was standing there, they went to the window and they started making sounds, and she looked up, and the Portuguese people are very superstitious. She thought really ghosts, and she started running. We never saw her again.
By the end of December 25, 26, came orders to move us. We went on a death march. We worked from early in the morning to late at night, you know, in snow. Anybody who was not able to walk, they were shot on the spot and they thrown on the side. We slept in the barns. And there was one man, he was a Vorarbeiter, so he was able to get to the kitchen, he take some more food with him. He had a couple of breads with him. So while he was sleeping, I noticed a bread. I took it away from him. So only time that I remember I steal from anybody.
Did you regret stealing the bread from that man?
No. You don't? As a matter of survival. He had 2, 3 breads, and I had nothing. Matter of survival.
And then I lived with a Polish peasant family. I never knew such anti-Semitism existed even. And here I was a Jew in their house and they didn't know. I was in charge of 2 cows, 5 pigs, bringing in water enough for a horse, cleaning. They liked me very much. I seemed to have been a very good worker. Of course, going to church every Sunday, going to the priest and telling all the sins that you sinned during the week. Number one, I had the worst problem to begin with because I didn't know what to say and how to behave myself. I had to think of all kinds of sins. So I would tell them that I ate meat on Friday and I used bad language.
In August of 44, the 6 of us were chosen to work. We were put on a cattle car headed for Germany. I actually made bombs for the Germans. There were 2 women Nazi guards. One was the little Maria, one was the big Maria. The big Maria was very good. The little Maria, on the other hand, she was looking for every excuse possible to throw you down to the floor and hit you with her heel of her boot. Over your stomach, your heart, your head. She had joy in hitting the Jews. When it was cold, we worked outside and we had to find branches under the snow. We had no socks, no underwear, our hands were blue. So one day somebody said, why don't we make gloves from a blanket? That night, I had a knife which was given to me because I was chosen to cut the bread. And we made mittens. The blanket was not ruined because of it. It was still plenty big. The next day, we put on the mittens to work under the snow. It was a pleasure. It was so wonderful. But little Maria saw the gloves, and she went berserk. She will report us to the commandant, and we will be punished. We were so nervous. What will the punishment be? So that night, during the appel, she stepped forward and she said, our Flüchtlingen made gloves from blankets, thereby ruining German property. We were scared stiff. I thought my heart will fall out. She walked away, and he was thinking for a few seconds, and he started to say, I'm so proud. And I was thinking, what is he proud of? I am so proud to have Flüchtlingen who are smart enough. If we don't give them gloves, they make their own. Well, what a relief. I wanted to scream. I wanted to hug somebody. So little Maria lost this battle, and it was so sweet. We won.
We were selected, and we went where the people arrived and they left their clothes. We were sorting what people brought, and we were really lucky, as far as lucky, because we found a lot of food. Well, actually, we found the calendar, and we saw that it was Yom Kippur. So we didn't want to eat, we wanted to fast the day, so we put away our bread after the fast. We were fasting. From Auschwitz, we went to Reichenbach, to another factory where we were making parts for the plane. And from there, they gave us a bread the size of a brick. And they said that it has to last us for 3 days. So we went on the death march. And whoever wasn't able to walk, they just shot them and threw them in the gutter.
After D-Day, there were frequent air raids, and we felt, we sensed that the war is coming to an end. From that small camp, we were taken back to Strasshof, to the large camp. The conditions were very difficult there. They were preparing us to be taken from that Strasshof camp to Theresienstadt. But to our great relief, the railroad tracks were bombed by the Allies. So we were stuck in Strasshof till the end of the war.
After that, we got on a boat. It was headed here to the United States. The name of the boat was Nyasa. A lot of people, overcrowded boat, and we traveled a long time because we had to go around the mines in the water, many weeks. I think about 6. There was another boat after us that came a year later, and they got blown away, all of them. So when we came here, we went to Virginia. We thought we were going to get off, but they wouldn't allow us in. So we all stood on deck and cried, grown-ups, children, everybody. Was awful. So we continued on, and we ended up in Cuba. And in Cuba, my mother with the rest went down, and I stayed with my father, and the captain wouldn't let us off. He said, something's wrong with your papers or whatever. And I started to cry like I never cried in my life. And he looked at me and he got petrified. He got scared of me, nothing of a child. And he said, go, go, go. And he threw us, he said, get out of here, go, go. Life in Cuba was much better.
The Allies were coming from every direction, so we were going in circles. My cousin was sitting on my right. The train was bombed again. This time, my car had a direct hit. My cousin died instantly next to me. I was wounded. My hand was broken. The next morning, early in the morning, before daybreak, 2 or 3 young men came out from the bushes, and they said, don't worry, the war is over, the Americans are here.
We were on a cattle train going and going. We didn't see the sun, we didn't see nothing, nothing. One day while we were stopped, we stopped a day or 2 or 3 days, we didn't know how many days. The door opens up, and 2 American soldiers came to the door and says, you're free, you're free, you're free. We didn't know what free means.
We stood in Hamburg, nothing happened. One girl looked out and she said, it looks like the SS left us, we are free. And we couldn't believe it, you know, but that was it. The Red Cross took us over. I'll never forget the news that we are free. We all hugged and we cried and we kissed and we were wondering, what's now?
One day in April, Russian soldiers appeared in front of the gate. The Germans were running away, and the Red Army was opening the gates and said, you can go wherever you want to. And of course, it was a tremendous joy.
I was liberated January 17th, 1945. Oh my God, it's hard to describe. I was just so happy.
How did that change your life?
How did this change my life? Not much better, really, because when I came back, finally, and I realized that I'm alone, I really didn't want to go on living. You know, when you face death, then somehow you want to live, you don't want to die. But then all of a sudden, I was free. And I didn't want to even live, because there was nobody.
When I woke up, I said, wait a minute, I'm in a hospital. And I said to myself, do I have my hand? And I had to know. And I removed the sheet. My hand was gone. And I started to cry. Suddenly the lights went up and a nurse was in front of me. She said, would you like a glass of milk? I said, I would like. And I couldn't take the glass away until the glass was empty. I handed her back the glass and I stopped crying. At that moment, that milk was more important than my hand.
We went to Denmark. The prince shook hands with us. He was really very, very nice. And we had to take hot showers. The first time I had a hot shower in a year.
Us Jewish people traveled together on the boat and landed in Cuba. We stayed together. We had a rabbi. We had an aguda.
Finally, we arrived back to our village. And we went to the house where we used to live. And we went from one room to another. And in the last room on the floor, my father was lying. He came back before us and he found the house totally looted, empty, bare, nothing was left in it, and we were reunited with him. Ours was the very rare, unusual family where both parents and both children survived. So I was happy that I was able to go to a Jewish school where there were other Jewish children. On the one hand, I was happy. On the other hand, I was, believe it or not, I was embarrassed with my other friends to be a child whose family had survived.
I'm the only survivor in a big family. I was completely out of religion. I had trefus, I had everything. I remembered, but I didn't want to know. I was put in a DP camp with Hungarian boys. They bothered me. He says, put on tefillin, put on this. I says, I don't want to hear of this. I didn't want to know nothing about it. I had a trefus sandwich I was eating that time. And they told me, we're not going to let you go till they throw away the sandwich. They told me, you know, you come from a Jewish home, you this, you that. You start going back to your religion. They put something, a hurricane in my head, and I threw away that sandwich. The Klausenburger Rebbe was there in the DP camp. They brought me up to the Rebbe, and he started talking to me, and they put a few boys around me that wouldn't let me go. And this way I came back little by little to what my origin was.
I always thought if I get married and have a home, it will be kosher because of my family. In case, like, they would be living if they had to come to my house and I have a kosher home.
How did you restart your life after the war?
With difficulties.
We were going, I think, for 13 days, and I was sick for 13 days, seasick. I don't go near a boat. And we arrived April 8, 1945.
I came here in 1947. I had a nightmare every night for many, many years that I was falling into a black ditch, into a hole, a black hole, and when I came here, it disappeared.
I loved America right away. I thought it's the best country in the world. I think Americans don't appreciate it enough.
I came to New Haven to my uncle, and he had 5 children. They were married, and they were very loving and very warm.
After everything that happened to you, what motivates you to wake up every morning?
You people, the family, my wife, my 3 children, my grandchildren.
After 5-6 years later, I found my wife and we got married. We have a beautiful family, Baruch Hashem.
The overarching question that everybody asks is, how could Hashem let that have happened? The mashal I always give is the first time I took my infant child and I brought him to the doctor for shots.
We just had a session on Amunah with Rabbi Spivak.
His little infant, he took him to the doctor and he got a shot. The infant didn't understand why his father would do that.
The dad was the one who told the doctor to give the shot.
And I could sit there and explain, and I say, Tzadikal, let me tell you something. There's something out there called a virus. What the doctor is doing is he's giving you a small amount in your bloodstream. Am I going to explain that to a 10-month-old? Absolutely not. There is no possible way that he would possibly in any way be able to understand. So I didn't explain it to him.
And in the end, he thought maybe he would run away and stay away.
He turned around, started crying his eyes out, and put his head on my shoulder and holding on tight. Why? And the answer is one word: trust.
And that would resemble us still trusting in Hashem, and I thought that was really meaningful.
I am as clueless as to why the Holocaust happened as my son is why I let him get a shot. But it's my job to trust him that he's running a good show, and he knows it. He knows what he's doing.
I think the lesson we can learn from the Holocaust is that everybody should just respect each other.
Respecting other people for who they are.
Thank you so much for coming. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
I learned not to take things for granted. It just made me think oh my God, I'm so thankful to have both my parents and my whole family.
Be grateful for everything. Everything. You have a little less, it's not important. It doesn't matter.
Oh, I get a present. How nice.
At the time of the Holocaust, no one was as accepting as we are accepted now, and we live a great life.
We take a lot of things for granted that they didn't even have.
Well, what I have to say to this generation, I would like them to remember, not to forget. It's very, very important.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. I feel the American people don't appreciate America. I think people should get involved, people should speak their mind, and people must remember the Holocaust.
Everybody should not forget what we Jewish people went through there. You should never forget the horror what we went through there, and the korbanos that we gave, what we lost there.
If you know someone who survived the Holocaust and you've never talked to them because you're scared or nervous, I think you should just talk to them.
It's fascinating, and it's also important for future generations to know what happened to the Jews.
My message was that if times are rough, you can still push through it. Really do anything you put your mind to.
Even when in a hard situation, you should not give up faith.
I have a very strong will. That's what keeps me going. And Baruch Hashem, I have wonderful children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, which I never thought I'll ever have.
Oh, thank you. ASHAR, make the Jewish community strong, make Israel strong, and to be hopeful and to be determined.
Who is your favorite grandson?
Who is my favorite grandson? Of course, present company excluded. I would say, I tell you, my favorite grandsons are Avinoam, Alex, David, Akiva, Elisheva, Ari,
grandsons.
Lydia, and Julia. These are my favorite grandchildren.